Welcome to Chronicles of the Phoenix podcast. How are you doing today?
You know, I can't get rid of this lingering cough and it's really annoying me. But other than that, I'm good.
I hate the lingering cough. It's so hard. It just lasts for weeks.
Weeks. I feel like a lot of people are suffering with lingering cough syndrome.
They are.
And it's annoying.
It's very annoying, and I'm sorry for you.
But you saved me with 2 hidden cough drops, and I appreciate you for that.
I think we have a lot of cough drop magic in this office.
We do, because you saved me last time, too.
Yeah. And then one time one just flew out of your bag, remember?
Oh, yeah. Magic. That was the magic episode.
Magic.
Yeah.
So we have an exciting episode for you all today, and we're going to be talking about when everything feels hopeless, how one shift can change the whole system. And we were thinking a lot about this since we last chatted because there's a lot going on around us that many people are feeling hopeless about. Mm-hmm. And I know we've had that theme come up in our therapy practices, and we see that in our country around us. And a lot of people feel like they don't have control or don't know what to do with kind of all the emotion that is out there right now. And I also think that one of the points that you made, Erin, in the last pod that really stuck with me was the comment about how people do better when they feel like they're part of a solution.
Yeah.
And I know you were talking about, you know, in an organization and how to kind of get your team on board, which again is like motivating for change. But it stuck with me because I think in these moments when in life, right? And yes, we're referencing something right now, but there's also never ending things that can lead to people being hopeless or feeling hopeless. Mm-hmm. One of the things that tends to help is feeling like you can be a part of a solution in some way.
Yeah.
So we have a great conversation planned for everybody today, talking about hopelessness, talking about behavior and systems, family relational theory, and just looking at how we are all interconnected and small changes that we make individually can impact in a much larger way.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about it too, and my life operates in themes. I think a lot of people's life operates in themes, and it's certainly something that's come up a lot this week, and definitely with the state of the country and the fear that comes along with that for me personally, but also I think in practice. I'm also seeing a lot of people that are in like transitional periods in their life and working on this sort of hopelessness and feeling about what's next and some fear. I know people that are at the ends of their career and heading into retirement and what that's going to look like, especially with the uncertainty of the world and as friendships are changing, or if you're becoming a parent for the first time and your relationship changes. There's just so many transitional periods in life that can make you feel out of control and hopeless in that because you don't know how to be part of the solution, and it feels like everything's happening to you or about you rather than you have agency in moving forward. So a lot of the conversations that I've had this week are about getting grounded in the parts of what's happening you do have agency in.
Right. Which makes a lot of sense because I think that experience you're describing is often a sense of powerlessness in a system. And whether that's your family system, whether that is a system outside of you at a more macro level, and that powerlessness is often tied to feeling like we don't have any influence, and that leads to hopelessness.
Yeah, and fear, right? I think there's a lot of fear that goes along with what's to come. How will I be able to move forward? Will my relationship stay intact? Will I still have a job? Like all of that. And then that results in depression, anxiety, behaviors, anger, irritability, like all of those things come out, and it just has this ripple effect that can sometimes be negative and have consequences.
Yeah, and I think that links beautifully to our conversation last time when we talked about the Enneagram. We talked about the drivers. We also were referencing core fears a little bit in that conversation and fear-driven leadership and those things. And I think what you're speaking to is recognizing that when your core fear is activated, or even any fear, but especially when it's tied directly to sort of what your personality brings as its core fear, the automatic response is we tend to then be in the more stressed version of ourselves. And so what plays out is a behavior that again, doesn't totally align for us and kind of shows our stress and that there's stress in the system. And we have to really examine what's driving us in that moment, because when we let fear drive, we aren't as effective as we are when we can recognize that's what's happening and move to a place of action.
Right. And I think that when you're moving against yourself, the boulder feels heavier and you
Mm-hmm.
feel like you're moving uphill rather than when you're moving in alignment.
Mm.
It feels like you're more moving on a conveyor belt.
What would you say hopelessness feels like for you personally?
Hopelessness for me feels like I don't have control of her situation. I feel boxed in.
Yep.
As I think about hopelessness, my shoulders feel tense.
Mm-hmm.
I feel it in my body, right? Like I feel my chest feels tight, my shoulders feel tense. I feel contained.
Mm.
I feel like I don't have options.
Mm-hmm.
When I feel the most hopeful, I feel like there's limitless options for me. I'm someone that always has contingency plans. I usually will plan A through Z so that I don't ever worry about something not working.
Mm-hmm.
Because if A doesn't work, I'm like, no big deal. I already have B planned out, or C. Like I have a lot of faith in my ability to pivot. So I'm a very flexible leader, mom, partner.
Yep.
So that helps when I feel like I can't leverage that skill that I have. I feel very hopeless and feel angry, I guess, or frustrated. Maybe frustrated is more the right word.
Right. And what you're saying is exactly what research shows us. Because I think when you're talking about being boxed in or not having options, there's hopelessness and helplessness. And I think when we feel like we aren't able to do something and move to action or have an option or 10 different backup plans on how to get out of a situation, we have the perception that there is no control, which amplifies our hopelessness. So it's like a cycle.
Exactly. The more that I'm able to slow down, zoom out, and see the options that I actually have, because usually it's a perception that I have,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not, and I've lost sight of the different points in the road that I can actually take, and I feel more limits than actually are there.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of a perception than reality.
Yeah, and I think looking for options is sort of a form of creativity. You have to be in a creative mindset to be able to see, and that's one of your many strengths, I think, is that ability to take a problem and see 5 different solutions. And it's not just one way, but it also is something that we can try. And if that doesn't work, try the next. And so it really involves you using your creative mind to come up with these things, right? That's something I notice very easily in you because I don't operate in that same way. I struggle to formulate the same level of kind of creative thinking around problem solving or solutions. And so it makes sense that when you're having a perception that those options are blocked off or there's limits on what the options could be, it kind of stifles creativity also because we're in that more core fear-driven place.
Right. And I think sometimes I feel that way if I am on a team where I'm not allowed to be able to be that creative self and my creativity is stifled.
Mm-hmm.
And then that gets shut off. Systems are dynamic, and change in one part forces adaptation in another. And one of the things that always makes me think about that is the butterfly effect.
Mm-hmm.
Edward Lorenz has this butterfly analogy where his famous idea where he says butterfly flapping its wing in Brazil could set off a tornado in Texas, which isn't actually true, but it is true that small events can create a ripple effect. And we see that in trauma, that one traumatic event doesn't just impact that one situation. There's ripple effects,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like my dad's stroke had ripple effects for all of us
Mm-hmm.
for years to come.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just that he had a stroke. It impacted where they lived, how they lived, his retirement, their plans for retirement. It impacted, my mom's life. It impacted our relationships, his relationships with his grandparents forevermore.
Right.
And that was the ripple that one medical event had.
Right. And that's why a lot of people who reference trauma talk about it in terms of like the before and the after. Like these events often mark time and sort of anchor us to like what life was like before and what life is now like after. And so in the moment, you're dealing with it, you're navigating it. But when you kind of reflect back and you recognize the huge ripple effect that this change had, it really becomes the propelling force in a direction that we have to adapt to.
Why do small changes feel insignificant even though they're powerful?
We are conditioned to believe that things that are big, that have a lot of energy, are the most impactful, and that things that we do that we barely see the impact of aren't doing anything. I think we oftentimes try to set the bar really high. And we've talked about this in past pods where the best way to make change is small incremental change.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel as satisfying because we aren't just nailing it. And I think, again, as humans, this might not be universal, but I think it could be. We want to put effort in and see a result. And so back to our conversations on resolutions and everything else, we want to set our sights on this is the change I want to see happen. And so I'm going to make this very large effort so that I see results quickly and I'm motivated. And we think that's our motivator. So that's more the side of seeing a big change happen and seeing a big result, when what is actually the most impactful is small incremental changes where you may not notice day to day that anything is different. And it doesn't give us the immediate feedback of what we might want to be seeing that we feel like sustains us, but we also don't necessarily notice what's changing in the moment. And I think we talk a lot about this in our therapy practice as well, in terms of planting seeds and how a lot of the work we do with people we work with, but also the changes that the people we're working with make. I've had so many people come to me and say, like, I'm just not seeing that I'm doing anything differently yet, or I'm frustrated with myself because I've been talking about this for months and I don't think I've changed. And then I'm often bringing into the room the idea that so much of this time has been planting the seeds to get to the right environment to grow, and that those are really tiny, small, incremental changes that are made. And when all the pieces come together and the soil is just right and we have the environment we need and we feed those seeds the way that they need to be fed, they will grow, and then you will see the fruits of your labor.
I think that's true. And I also think that sometimes when it's done over time in small incremental changes like that, you don't even notice the transformation because it just becomes the new normal. So sometimes I'll be pointing out like the differences that I'm seeing. And I also think about it as you were talking, I think about it as a parent. You know, when I'm working with my kids on a challenge that they might have that's pretty significant, and even I'll be stuck in the middle of it and like being like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're still here. Like it's so hard and I'm so upset that they're still struggling this much, whatever. But then when I step back and think about where we started and where we are today, I think, wow, we've actually made significant progress. I just was looking through the wrong lens.
Yes. And I think there is fear that gets triggered in us when we have, even if we haven't totally noticed all the changes, but then behavior reverts back.
Yeah.
It's triggering. It feels like, especially with our kids, I shared an example with you this week of the same process with my son. And so we tend to hyper focus on that thing. Oh, we're back where we were before. Yeah. And until we slow down the process and recognize all the change that has actually led us for this moment to feel different.
Yeah.
We were so used to this behavior at the time, replaying and replaying and replaying. But now that it's not as frequent, it stands out and we're like, oh no, we need to fix this and change this. And at least that's my process that I tend to go to. And then I have to remind myself that this blip, this reverting back or relapse in behavior, I think we talk about a lot, is normal. And sometimes you're going to bounce back to your old path. And it doesn't mean it's going to be that hard to get back on track either.
And from a family systems perspective, like when our child relapses in that behavior, it also can result in us relapsing back into our own reactive response that was ineffective in the way that we responded to our child, which can trigger the child. And then, you know, and then you have a moment that isn't beautiful. until
Mhm.
until you take deep breaths and reset and then gain perspective
Yeah.
and recognize how far you've come and look at it differently and respond differently and repair and move forward again.
Right. The connection we're looking to make here is recognizing how those small shifts have a larger impact on the full system. And so, what it involves is having awareness that that's what's happening, seeing the small changes along the way, trying to be present in that, and recognizing that sometimes we do have to pause before we're having a reaction, or we're able to change a behavior and do it differently in a very small way that then creates the ripple effect in that relationship, like you're talking about. So that could be small within your family, that could be on your team at work, and that could be in the larger community.
Exactly. I think as a parent, as a leader, as a community member, whatever role that you're in, it can often feel uncomfortable, uncertain, vulnerable to move to action
Mm-hmm.
and make changes. And, it's so hard, I think, in this society to be different, to stand out.
Mm-hmm.
And there's risk in that. There's, especially today, right? Like there's so much risk. You put stuff out on the internet, you might get trolled. It's really risky to take action in that way.
And challenge,
And
really.
challenge.
Challenge like something that's become a norm.
Yeah.
Or get behind something that isn't fully supported outwardly. That's a very vulnerable experience.
Yeah. And one of the things years ago, we did this training and it was a leadership training. It was really cool. It was bringing together generations and really looking at like toxic masculinity and trying to help bring in men and boys together and community members. And we brought in trainers from Massachusetts that did the training for us. And they showed this video on the first follower and the second follower. And it always stuck with me. And you always talk about leadership and the leader, and the leader's the most important, but really what they illustrated is the leader's important, right? The leader really is the person that's taking the initial risk to say, I have something that's important that I feel like needs to happen, right? But that first follower says, all right, I'm with you. Like, I'll do this. But it's the second follower that's actually the most important, because the second follower is the person that the people around going, there's 3 people that, all right, maybe it's not so scary to jump in. And then more people jump in and then you've got a movement.
Right.
Which I always thought that was so interesting. And I think like it also to me represents that change takes time, that resistance will happen, and to be like prepared for that,
Right.
whatever level it is, whether it's micro or macro, like to be prepared for pushback and resistance. If you're changing a system or a pattern within, you're gonna people are comfortable. We're creatures of habit, and we want to maintain the homeostasis, what we're comfortable with. And so you're going to get some resistance. But if you know in your core that what you're doing is right and true, stay the course, but also recognize that you're going to need at least the second follower to get the movement.
Right. I love that example, and you shared that video with me, and it's really powerful to see. It's kind of funny too. Maybe we can link it here for people to watch, but
horrible quality though.
It's okay. I feel like the point is fun. It's like a guy who's just like having a grand old time dancing wildly, like at a music festival setting, it looks like.
Yeah.
And how much courage it just highlights, like the courage it takes to be that person. And then you're like, oh, I'm going to join in. And this next person joins, and you see that, and they're both dancing wildly together, and a lot of people are spectating. But then, like you said, when that second follower comes in, so now the third person, this doesn't look super strange anymore. As much as it still is silly and funny, and they're just having a blast being themselves and authentic and silly, there's this experience that this isn't super isolating right now. This isn't just one person standing in something. I can join a movement. And I think one of the lines it said at that point was, if you had been sitting there watching and just thinking about joining, by the time the second follower is there, people are like, okay, I'm willing to take the risk and jump in now.
Yeah.
Because you had been contemplating that whole time going, probably back and forth between what is this guy doing? And then, but there's a piece of me that totally would do that too. And negotiating that. And once there was some safety created by that second follower joining, people were able to make the leap to get on board.
Yeah. What it makes me think about too is like whether it's big movement on a macro level or even on an individual level in a family system where you recognize that you need to put boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes, one person in the family system to accept that boundary. And then that second person to be like, okay, I get why she needs that boundary. And then everybody else will be like, okay, I can accept that boundary.
Mm-hmm.
And then you move forward and the pattern shifts.
Yes, because people have acceptance around that at this point. Like that boundary is in place. At first, it feels unnatural. And once we get used to it, okay, then a change is made and we see the impact of that change.
Yes. Yeah. How do you balance connection and authenticity when making a change?
That sounds really hard for me to do. I feel like I struggle with that. I struggle with standing in my own authenticity at times while connecting. I think that my personality type has often struggled with misreading or making assumptions about what connection can look like. And oftentimes, as the people pleaser in the room or the peacekeeper in the room, connection feels like it has to be taking perspective. And that often results in a loss of authenticity for me. So, in particular, I have to really consciously recognize that I want to show up standing in my own values and what's important to me. And that real connection is actually formed in that space when I show up authentically and meet you authentically. And that doesn't mean we agree, but it means we're able to connect on a common issue.
Oh, that makes sense.
So, why is connection, not independence, the foundation for resilience and transformation?
I talk about this a lot, actually. We are relational beings and we heal in connection. I talk about that a ton with regards to addiction work. Addiction is such a shame-based disease that results in isolation and which only fuels the disease even further.
Mm-hmm.
And the pathway to healing is connection and community. And I think that that's the same for in the workplace, healing a sick culture and improving outcomes. I think it's the same in a family system. I think it's the same for an individual. And I think it's the same for community. We've become more and more isolated as a society with the internet and the more divisive we've become. And the more we come together and connect, the more we will find hope and connection. It's human nature.
Right. We are wired for connection out of the gate from birth and even before.
And belonging.
And belonging, yes. So when we're in a space, like you're saying, that culture at work or in a hopeless space in our families, in our communities, in the greater world, finding a way to connect in with others is going to be sort of like the recipe that helps shift that experience for you and lead you to the position of feeling like you have agency again and you have the ability to influence change.
Exactly. So I think some of the key points and takeaways are identify small leverage points, shift one behavior consistently, stay connected while shifting. I think that's so important.
Mm-hmm.
Connection really does create safety and hope. Expect resistance. I think that's so key to also combat the feeling of isolation and hopelessness.
Mm-hmm.
Is that if you expect it, it won't feel so jarring.
Mm-hmm.
And notice the ripple effects.
Yeah.
In a positive way. Hopefully you don't have negative ripple effects, but there will be ripple effects.
Mm-hmm.
Notice them. Awareness, I think, is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Which of those steps feel the hardest for you?
I would say two of them feel hard to me. The shifting one behavior consistently is definitely hard for me. Consistency is one of my greatest challenges. And much like we've talked about throughout this pod, it's hard to notice small changes sometimes. And so when I'm not paying attention or I'm feeling lower energy, like the momentum that I need to carry forward, changes that I make tends to kind of wane and dip. However, it does highlight shifting one behavior consistently, which is also part of my problem. Is I think sometimes I try to change too much at the same time. I feel like if I have the momentum, I may as well run with it.
Sure.
And then I've bitten off more than I can chew. And so I have to pull back to keep it to one thing consistently. And then the other is the expecting resistance piece. I think when I do anticipate resistance, which sometimes equates to conflict for me, that is something I tend to avoid. So building the space to expect that there will be resistance when I might make a change in my life. And it's the same thing you're talking about with like that boundary setting that I talk to people about this all the time. It feels like you have to muster up so much energy to get there and make that first change. But most people really try hard to pull you back to your norm, especially in your family system. So when you set a boundary and do something different, you're often faced with everybody trying to pull you back to do what you normally would do because that's what they expect from you. So I have to think of that type of resistance from that lens, the relational lens of I know I'm going to be met with people being confused by why I'm doing something different, and that's normal. And until the difference is consistent enough, people will eventually adapt.
Do you find transparency helps? Sometimes I find, especially with my family, that I'm really transparent about what I'm doing. Again, I'm comfortable with if it results in conflict, at least with my kids and husband. So I will just be very clear, like, this is why I'm doing this. This is why it might feel different, but this change is important to me and I think it'll help me and us.
Ultimately, yes, I think that does help everything become clear once you've identified what that small leverage point is and that thing you're going to be changing. Because I struggle with consistency, I have struggled with it. That's even less about conflict for me. I've struggled more with the idea that I feel a pressure to uphold something I say I'm going to do. And I don't like when that's external pressure because I don't respond well to that. So I really have to feel internally motivated to stick with the change. And so I tend to not share, and this is something I've talked about in my own therapy for a while now, which is I will make a change and then eventually tell everybody about it. When I stopped drinking, that's what I did. I didn't go around telling everybody. My immediate family knew. Outside of that, nobody knew. I didn't tell anybody until I was probably, little by little, I let people in and would tell them, but until I was like a couple months down the line. And then I would start to share little by little that was a choice that I made because I needed to be successful at it.
Yeah.
I said I was doing it, but I definitely did not do like a social media blast of changing something about myself and let's see how it goes. Like that pressure impedes sometimes like my own internal motivation and becomes a deterrent for me sometimes. So that's how that works with me.
Though I think the insight though that you have about your drivers is so important. And I feel like it's so helpful to know that about yourself, not judge it.
Right.
Just be like, this is what I need. And I know that I'll be successful and I'll be more successful in meeting this goal that I have if I give myself the space and permission to have privacy in achieving it before I put it out there.
Right. And I've worked really hard to at least bring one or two people in when I'm doing something because the flip of this is that you do everything in isolation.
Yeah.
So just like you're saying with connection, I know it's more effective for me to have some connection, someone to talk to. But that's where I'll say in this realm, where I was really vulnerable and connected was on an online group of East Coast women who were sober. And we had a Slack channel where we could all, almost like a forum, we could all write things in, support one another. I didn't know any of these people at the time, but that felt a little safer because that community felt like I would be understood in my choices within that community. It probably would have been fine if I shared with people, but I did have a bit of fear that there would be some disconnection between myself and people who didn't hold the same value at that time.
And didn't understand and feeling like it maybe would have taken away from your experience and your motivation or you're having to defend what you were doing, even if that wasn't the other person's intention. But it's like what we talked about last time, like intention versus impact. And what I love about what you're sharing right now is how you leveraged a solution to create hope for yourself. Because you wanted a change for yourself that would improve the outcome of your life that you knew that you wanted to do for yourself, and you found a way to do it, which created some hope for yourself.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the keys in terms of these steps is that piece about staying connected while shifting. When you talk about the second follower, a piece of that to me is, yes, I am less comfortable in a natural leadership position, as we've talked about. That's not my natural state. And I can get there and I can learn, but that doesn't feel as good to me as like I'm standing up and doing this thing. And I think that's a piece of this. But what helped me feel when I think of joining the online community that I did to talk about this, like I felt like a follower in that. Here were these women who were leading the charge, who had set up this whole system for people to connect and talk. Some of them met up and support one another from all over. It ended up going across the whole country, but at that time it was pretty small. And I didn't feel like I was leading it. I felt like I could show up as a follower among people who would be open about their own experiences, but also sort of led that charge first. So
yeah,
that's a piece of it too.
Oh, that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So I think aligned with what we were just talking about, there's also a lot of research about change and change management. And we talk a lot about that in our business with companies trying to understand the best way to implement a change and get people on board, right? This process of change. And we know that in resistance to that change, whether it's your family system, your work culture, something new you have to implement, something going on in the country, a change is often resisted against, which is what we said in our key points. So that resistance is normal, but the persistence for the change is what matters. And that's what propels it forward. I was just in a conversation with my cousin today about some of this human behavior. He was engaging in a conversation online about AI and just coming at it from a perspective of curiosity, like how are people utilizing this? What are they using? What makes the most sense for them? And was bombarded by a bunch of people saying this is, essentially saying, look, oh, you don't have your own brain. You can't think for yourself. Extreme resistance to AI. And I get that. I think there is somewhat of a normal reaction, like we're saying, to change and the fear that that brings up. And we're in the middle of this movement right now where AI is going to rapidly change things. And it already has, but it's going to continue to rapidly change things. And so I just thought that example was so poignant in the moment when we're afraid of what the change is going to bring, we resist it. And that's natural.
Totally natural. Yeah. I love what you said about coming at it from a place of curiosity. That's a theme that I often talk about because fear often results in defensiveness.
Yes.
And people pulling back and wanting to defend their position. And when you do that, you stop listening and you end up doing like butting heads. And we're seeing that on so many different levels right now.
Yes.
And you're seeing divisiveness and all of that stuff. But when you pull back and you just really seek to understand from a place of curiosity, it's transformational. And oftentimes you realize, again, the intention was much more pure in a lot of cases than you recognized that initially. The other person is willing to accept that their impact was not okay and move to change the pattern. Right. Which can create that ripple effect that you're looking for of adjusting the system in a positive direction.
Exactly.
Yeah. And personally, there's a lot of AI that scares me. But as a revisionist tool, I'm all in.
It's a tool, right? How do we leverage what we do with the tool? And I agree with you. And just taking that philosophy, and I'll admit it, I was like, you were way more on board with AI before I was. But I think it's a good tool, like you said.
I think about it as pruning.
Yes.
Maybe I've pruned parts of my brain that I used to use for editing and coming up with certain thoughts, but it's created an opening in the other parts of my brain that I didn't have capacity for.
Right.
Because I was using it for the things that AI now uses. I am able to use AI for. So I feel like I'm actually smarter now.
You are. I know you are.
Thank you.
I know that you are. I think that is very true.
Thank you. So thank you, Copilot and Claude and Chat. Because as a 7, I don't like to use just one AI tool.
We may have to have a pod about AI because it sounds like we're so passionate.
Clearly. All right. So our takeaways for today. Hopelessness is often systemic, not personal. One person's shift changes the entire relational dynamic. Micro actions create macro impact. Change feels uncomfortable, but discomfort is part of growth. You are not powerless. You are part of the system, and that means you have influence. I really like that one.
Me too.
So we hear you like tasks, so we're going to continue with that. Your task for the week, or 2 weeks, I should say. Identify one small shift you can make today in a relationship or system you're part of. For example, pause before reacting, set a boundary, express a need. Observe the ripple effect over the next week. Notice any changes in tone, behavior, or responses. And journal it or share it. How did making that shift feel? What resistance did you encounter? And what surprised you?
And you can journal in writing or in your head.
Or in your head or on your body.
On your body. Yes. We are accepting of all types of journaling.
Yes.
Well, we hope you like what you've learned today. We can't wait to be back. And we will be back in 2.
Be back in 2.